This is Brenna Quigley, your personal geologist and terroir guide. Join me on a road trip through the geologic history of your favorite wine regions around the world. This is Roadside Terroir. Season 2, Burgundy's Côte d'Or is made possible by our Season 2 partners, Becky Wasserman and Company, La Palais, and Acker Wines. We're determined to keep this content free and accessible for everyone. If you'd like to support our show, please consider becoming an insider. Insiders have access to lots of cool stuff, including extra photos, travel guides, and extended interviews with our guests. To learn more, visit our website, roadsideterroir.com. Please don't drink and drive, and remember to keep your eyes on the road. This episode contains explicit language.
On the right.
In our last episode, we explored the relationship between terroir and magic throughout the village of Vosne Romanée. And while Vosne Romanée is, of course, the poster child for this discussion, the central core of the Côte de Nuits is filled with examples of vineyards that transcend reality. The leaders, of course, are the Grand Crus, which extend from Vosne Romanée to Gevrey-Chambertin. Today, we'll continue our journey through Grand Cru Territory while traveling through the villages of Vougeot, Chambolle-Musigny, and Morey-Saint-Denis.
You will turn on the à gauche. Perfect.
Oh, excited. We begin back in the car with Marie-Andrée Mugneret, driving north along the route to Grand Cru. As we leave Vosne Romanée, there are Village vineyards on our left and Bourgogne vineyards on our right. And then, suddenly, as we cross the border into Vougeot, there's Bourgogne on our right and Grand Cru on our left. Here's Paul Wasserman.
And so it's a village that's basically synonymous with its greatest vineyard, the Grand Cru of Clos de Vougeot, which is of huge historical importance for Burgundy because of its relationship with Citeaux.
Vougeot is a tiny village composed almost entirely of one gigantic Grand Cru, the Clos de Vougeot. Within Vougeot, there are 3 hectares of Village vineyards, 12 hectares of Premier Cru, and 51 hectares of Grand Cru Clos de Vougeot, crowned appropriately with a castle right at the top. Here's Daniel Jonas.
Clos de Vougeot tends to be this sort of beast. The tannins are rather severe, austere, angular. Perhaps they evolve and soften over time, but I find that they often don't. I mean, there are some producers who have been extremely successful with Clos de Vougeot, whose wines I love, such as the Mugnier sisters. Mayo, Jean-Nicolas Mayo makes a wonderful Vougeot. Hulot a lot. And the greatest, historically for me has been René Angel. No longer exists since his death.
There are several distinct lieux-dits throughout the vineyard that most everyone agrees vary greatly in terms of quality. And although it remained a monopoly for over 100 years following the French Revolution, there are over 80 owners within the Clos de Vougeot today, adding to the variability you may find in the wines. On our left, elaborate metal gates spell out the names of revered and historic producers, marking the entrances to each parcel in a quiet yet grand display.
It's a very old door. It's for the plots which have an access here,
right?
Of course. We can imagine when, a long time ago, when they arrived with horses, it's the place to come inside.
We drive up the slope and into the parking lot of the castle. Marie-Andrée's parcel of Vougeot is just in front of the castle, the area widely considered to be the best part of this big and variable vineyard.
So, our plots of Le Vougeot is 18 rows from here, in this side. You can see it's real black clay. And for me, I said this parcel is magic, because excepted the effect of frost of our ale, the production is very consistent. We don't have any big problem with this soil here. I don't know if it's the plants that my father chose when he replanted in 1953 and 54, or if it's the terroir. but it's a very nice plot to work. I love this place. And especially in the morning when you have the sunrise with the color of the castle. I love this place. Yeah. But if you want, as we have grass, we can walk a little. And there is a legend which say that there is a tunnel between Château du Clos de Vougeot and Abbaye de Cîteaux. You heard about Abbaye de Cîteaux?
No.
It's a very famous abbey where the Cistercian monks are. And the abbey is on the east part of the Côte d'Or, maybe around, I think it's 15 kilometers, 20 kilometers. And the legend say that we have a tunnel between the Clos de Vougeot and the abbey, because the first part of the Clos de Vougeot was built by the Cistercian.
Oh, okay.
And if you visit the castle, you have the old press. It's very interesting.
So Cluny was pretty much the center of Europe. The abbeys, like the foundational abbeys, Cluny was one of them, founded in 910, started to develop sister abbeys all around Europe. And so they became orders. And Cluny was, according to what I've read, probably one of the wealthiest of those orders in the Middle Ages. And with wealth comes a certain amount of laxness, I guess. And a lot of monks were complaining that they'd forgotten the principles of the church, which were basically to live modestly, to work hard, and to pray a lot. So a few of them branched out and founded the Abbey of Cîteaux. And the original thought of Cîteaux was to return to modesty, silence, prayer, manual work. And so they founded Cîteaux in 1098, and it was a few kilometers east of Vaune-Romanée and Vougeot, and basically in what was pretty much a swamp with pretty hard conditions. I believe they tried to grow vines, didn't succeed, but very quickly they were given land in Vougeot, like 1110 or something like that. It probably took them about 2 to 3 centuries to piece the whole thing together, but they started planting vines. So they founded what was the winery at the time. Basically, the cellar was built in the 12th century. There's 4 huge presses. 2 of them have been dated back to the 1400s. And then the castle was built, I think, beginning in 1550 or 1551. And just by the size of the presses, you can see the magnitude of what was produced. Certainly, even those debated, I think most people agree that by the 1400s, the Clos de Vougeot was pretty much complete the way it is.
And if you want, we can walk a little, and if you want to have the view of the castle.
Oh, wow.
You see something interesting? When we didn't work the soil for a long time, all the limestones are going on the surface. You see? If you come after the labor, the view is the black clay. But in fact, the concentration of limestone is really important here.
Yeah.
So very good draining. And you know, our father was medicine doctor. He was an ophthalmologist. And when he was a medicine student, he decided to buy this parcel of Clos de Vougeot because his grandfather had a parcel of Clos de Vougeot, and the children had to sell the parcel to pay the tax after the death of this grandfather. But this grandfather gave to my father a barrel of Clos de Vougeot of his birth year, and it was 1929. 1929 was a magic year. My grandfather said it was the vintage of the last century. But my father said, okay, and I have one day to buy a plot. And in 1953, he had the opportunity to buy this parcel by auction. And each time I'm in this parcel, I said, thank you very much, because it's a very, very nice place for this plot. And I love the wines that we produce in this parcel.
Thank you so much for taking us here.
It's a lovely place. My wedding was in the...
Really?
Yes, it's very, very nice.
We head back to the cellar where we're joined by Marie-Christine. Marie-Andrée's sister.
Special. Okay.
Daniel visited their father, Georges Mugneret, on his very first visit to Burgundy back in 1982.
I hold a special, place in my heart for that domain because of the memory and because how it influenced my career and my life. But I don't hold on to just memories. When I taste something, I'm tasting for the wine itself. And I think that they're making such extraordinary wines. There's no, gender in the world today, but in Burgundy also, it's just extraordinary how many women are taking the role of leading the domains and making great wine. I think the world has changed to a much better place. So Marie-Andrée and Marie-Christine, I think that the wines have just gotten better and better every year. There's a purity of fruit, there's a sensuality to the wines, texture, aromatic, complexity that makes wines so seductive, but not simple either.
Welcome in the cellar, where we finish the life of the wine.
Together, we taste through their wines from Nuits Saint-Georges, Vosne Romanée, Eschizot, Chambolle-Musigny, and of course, the Clos de Vougeot, while the sisters tell us the story of the domain's past, present, and future.
So at the beginning, Mr. Mugneret, our grandfather, married Mrs. Gibourg, and it was the beginning of the domain Mugneret-Gibourg because they bought the family house and 3 hectares of Vosne Romanée just close to the house and the winery. And then they bought 2 parcels of Échezeaux, Échezeaux les Rouges du Bas and Échezeaux les Quartiers de Nuits. And they bought a parcel of Bourgogne Générique. And it was 1934. They had only one son, Georges Mugneret. And when he was young, his parents said him, no, viticulture and wine, it's too hard work. You have to have another job. And he said, I want to be a doctor. Wow. So he began the studies of medicine and he continued to love wine. So he was medicine doctor and winemaker. So he was very busy. Our grandparents had only one son, Georges Mugneret. So our father had 2 daughters, Marie-Andrée and I. And so we have no brother, we were alone. And when our father passed away, he was young, 57 years old. I was chemist at this moment, and my sister was a student in Dijon for enology. So I decided to stop work in chemistry and I decided to work at the domain. We were alone, but we had to continue. So it was a very big challenge. You can imagine at this moment, 1988, few women were at the domain because it was really a job for men. Now it's totally the opposite and we are very happy with that. And to continue the story of the family, I was the older sister, so I had 2 daughters. And then my sister Marie-Andrée has 2 daughters too. So only women, 2 sisters and 4 daughters. Now the young generation is interesting to work with us at the domain. So we are very happy with that. And we have boys, but on the next generation, because my daughter Lucie has 3 children, a girl first, and then 2 boys. And for Marion, my niece, 2 boys. So now the color is totally changed. Now it's boys, but for the future.
Boys who will learn from strong women, which
Yes,
is very
yes,
cool.
exactly.
And the destiny for us was different, and we didn't ask any question. We had a mission. It's to continue the work of our grandparents and father. Never mind if you are a man or a woman. I think that the motivation is the most important. And a Clos de Vougeot.
So, Clos de Vougeot.
When I explain you that it's one of my favorite plots.
Yes, but Clos de Vougeot is really consistent. There is no...
It's a very resistant parcel.
Like you said, it's very concentrated and it's very strong, but it's very linear at the same time. Like it kind of constricts and continues in a really beautiful way. The Mugnieret sisters are often cited as making one of the best expressions of the Clos de Vougeot, one that recognizes its serious and robust potential, while also acknowledging the softer, more delicate side of the vineyard.
What I consider a successful Clos de Vougeot would be a Clos de Vougeot that has typically a dark fruit character. There's still going to be structure to it, but somehow like the depth of fruit, the concentration of fruit, the dark berries are shrouded in tannins, but it's almost like the tannins have been polished to a point where it's well integrated into the overall balance of the wine.
After thanking the sisters for their time and generosity, we head just up the road to the cellar of Jean-Nicolas Mayo of Domaine Mayo-Camazet to learn more about the history of the Clos de Vougeot and to happily collect another taste of this variable Grand Cru. Mayo-Camazet is yet another one of the truly great domains of Von Romanet, and another producer known for consistently crafting an excellent expression of the Clos de Vougeot. This makes sense given their historic connections to the vineyard and its prestige.
It's interesting because, of course, our family is really linked to the Clos de Vougeot, as you may know. The fact that Etienne Camuzet was the owner of the castle before donating it to the confrérie, actually not really donating it, selling it for a low price. It is interesting because it's been there for 900 years, and one of the questions about this building is why is it built there? I mean, it doesn't really make sense. It should have been more in the center of the clos, or it should have been lower on the slope. No one really knows why it's there. I've heard explanations. First of all, maybe the perception of terroir was maybe not the same then than now. So that could be a possibility. And so one explanation I really like is that the Clos de Vougeot was actually smaller than at the foundation, but the building was actually built then and was at the center of the then holding. So I like, of course, this explanation because that means we are in the heart of the original piece of Clos de Vougeot, but I've heard this hypothesis. I'm not sure there's a lot of historical evidence to support it. Where you have hard evidence, though, is that it's built on rock, on bedrocks. So there is no cellar, so to speak, in the Clos de Vougeot now. And because basically it's built on the bedrock, it's too hard to dig. And that leads me to the terroir of our piece. And being next to the castle, we have a very shallow terroir there. And we have another piece that is further south in Le Grand Maupertuis. Grand Maupertuis is next to Grands Échezeaux. And there you have layers. I mean, it's sedimentary and you can dig 2 meters, no problem. It's really different. And I think that we should perhaps have the idea that the Clos de Vougeot is very diverse. And it's not only top-bottom, but it's north-south, east-west, and it's very diverse. I'm used to saying that probably it would make sense to make a blend of everything, and that the monks were working that way. And it's well known they made different cuvées, and probably because they had different qualities. But what is true to that day, I haven't seen any recipe from the monks, nothing. They have not left anything saying, well, you know, for the great wine, this piece in the Quatre Journaux or in Grand Maupertuis, it's going to the big cuvée. There's, to my knowledge, nothing.
The founder of the domaine, Etienne Camuzet, was a political figure in the early 1900s who played a huge role in helping to classify the Grand Crus of Burgundy.
So he was very, very much instrumental in getting the process done. And also at that time, what was interesting is that in the Versailles Treaty, the peace treaty with Germany, there was a huge economic part in that treaty, and the appellations contrôlées were part of it. And this is interesting because this is, of course, the beginning of international recognition of appellation contrôlée. This was a very long and cumbersome and complex process, but actually that was a very important landmark. I think he was in favor of having the biggest area possible for Grand Cru. That's what we have in our family history and legend, let's say, which shows that he really understood what was at stake there. So he pushed for a classification that would be generous.
Jean-Nicolas pours us a taste of his 2020 Clos de Vougeot.
So, Clos de Vougeot. And this would be the blend. Normally our Clos de Vougeot is 90%, let's say, 92% the Prel-Cellier and 8-10% Grand Cru. Clos de Vougeot is more sturdy, of course. But our part of Clos de Vougeot, I would say, has a finesse that is not necessarily the mark of other Clos de Vougeot. Clos de Vougeot can be an imposing wine. I may have a Clos de Vougeot in this vintage that is a bit more severe than our usual Clos de Vougeot, but this is 20 and this is still a solid wine. So what we know is that there has been a commitment to quality for a number of years and decades, and this is arguably why Clos de Vougeot might be today one of the best known appellations, if not the best known appellation. I didn't say it's the best wine, but it's really widely known, and there is this consistency throughout history and this commitment and lack of variation.
Just north of the little appellation of Vougeot is another small village with an impressive pedigree, Chambolle-Musigny.
There's no wine in Burgundy that hits all the chords for me personally, like the great wines of Chambolle-Musigny. It has the incredible floral aromatics. It has the red to slightly deeper colored fruits. I think that they achieve the greatest texture for me. That sort of silkiness that just massages the palate and stays on the palate rather than attacks the palate, like a Clos de Vougeot, for example, could.
Chambolle consists of 93 hectares of village, 61 hectares of Premier Cru, and 26 hectares of Grand Cru vineyards. The Grand Cru is split between two vineyards, Musigny along the southern border and Bonmar at the northern border.
So there's no question that Musigny is, the emperor of the village of Chambolle, yet Les Amoureuses is not far behind.
Geologically, Chambolle could be divided into a few distinct sections. The southern side, known for Musigny and Les Amoureuses, is characterized by the Comblanchian limestone and a complicated network of faults. These faults often juxtapose the hard Comblanchian limestone against some softer Upper Jurassic marls. These softer marls erode away from the fault plains, leaving them exposed and visible on the surface. Musigny lies primarily onto the Comblanchian limestone, and towards the top of the slope, a big pocket of Grès-Lité seems to obscure a larger fault that splices in some softer Upper Jurassic marls at the top of the slope.
Musigny is many people's favorite Grand Cru, and it's a very austere, we often call it Cistercian. They've got very little decoration. There's no ornament. It's all about light and discretion and simplicity. It's a very intent wine, but it's not a big wine. It's not a powerful wine. The strange thing is that right next to it, it touches it, is Amoureuse. And it's opposite.
Just below Musigny, things get complicated as a series of sub-parallel faults slice through Les Amoureuses, giving the special vineyard a complicated patchwork of Comblanchian limestone, white oolite, Premot limestone, Astrea acuminata marl, and maybe even a sliver of crinoidal limestone at its base. And on top of that, there's extensive evidence of human activity as well. According to the local geologist François Vanier, just near the southern edge of Les Amoureuses is the Terroir de Vougeot, the site of a major ancient quarry that served as the source of the stones for the winery and cellar of the Chateau de Vougeot.
And that is a very fruit-driven, generous, not generous in size, but giving, embracing wine. that makes you think of its name, amoureuse. The earth is loving. It wasn't meant for the wine, but it couldn't carry a better name, in love. And that's how it feels. You taste it and everybody goes, ooh and ah, and oh my God, this is so beautiful. And it's not that it doesn't have a tannic structure, it's that it's often invisible. And the strange thing is that despite that absence of apparent core, it can age incredibly well.
The central part of Chambolle is made up of village and premier crus, and is clearly influenced by the combe that holds the small village. The geology is dominated by the Prémaux limestone here, which has been faulted by horizontal movements associated with the combe. The village itself is nestled at the base of dramatically steep cliffs of this hard limestone at the mouth of the combe. Rocky alluvial fans have been ejected from the valley, creating a patchwork of transported and residual soils on the lower slope.
But I think Chambolle is probably the village which, on a small scale, you notice that combe thing the most. The northern part of Chambolle is almost Morey in taste, and the southern part of Chambolle is an entirely different animal to anything else on the Côte, in a way.
The northern section of Chambolle is decidedly different from the southern part. One particularity Françoise points out is that many sections of the Prémaux limestone here are filled with little nodules of chert, called chai. Remember, we saw something like this on the hill of Courton, too. Over time, the Prémaux limestone weathers and erodes away, leaving behind a red, decarbonated, or non-calcareous clay. And while this quartzose phenomenon doesn't seem to continue into the neighboring village of Morey, much of the rest of the geology does. The other Grand Cru vineyard of Chambolle is the illustrious Bonnes-Mares, a strong foil to its southern counterpart.
The third of the great vineyards in Chambolle is Bonnes-Mares. We're up against Morey-Saint-Denis, and we go to an entirely different delivery. We're in a powerful Grand Cru, one that has a ridiculous amount of talent in it. You know, Mugnier, Dauvenay, Jujac, de Vougeot, Cyprien, Arlaud, and of course, did I say Roumier? Well, Roumier is probably the iconic wine in his cellar. Bruno Clair absolutely is in Bonnes-Mares, though on the Morey side. And of course, Drouhin makes a great Bonnes-Mares. Morte, Vougeot. There's really super talent in the vineyard.
Whereas the geology of Musigny and Les Amoureuses is complex, faulted, and obscured by human activity, Bonnes-Mares is a solid block, literally. According to Françoise's maps, Bonnes-Mares is bounded by faults at the top and at the bottom of the vineyard that come dangerously close to aligning with the borders of the climat. But even though there don't seem to be major faults within the vineyard, that doesn't mean the geology is monolithic.
It's another lesson in geology. There's a path that cuts it diagonally from the southeast corner to the northwest corner, and vaguely, but not exactly, on top of the path, upslope, is terre blanche, white soil, and on the bottom is terre rouge, red soil. And you can literally take a handful of earth from each and see the difference. It's so obvious. Most people have rows from the bottom to the top, so they actually have both terroirs. And in a way, most Bonnes-Mares is an assemblage wine because of that. Some people vinify separately. The most famous case is Christophe Roumier, who actually bottles a few bottles separately of the Terre Blanche and the Terre Rouge, and then many more of the blended version. And the combined wine is usually better than each of its parts.
The top of Bonnes-Mares is the soft, striking Ostrea acuminata marl, which produces white soils that sparkle with little oyster fossils. Just below it is the harder, also fossiliferous, crinoidal limestone that dissolves away into rich clay. And just below that, and the fault that coincides with the lower border of the vineyard, are the deeper red clays associated with the cherts unique to this part of Chambolle. As we make our way through the village of Chambolle, we set out to check in with Charles Lachaux one last time. We hop back into his truck and continue up the hill just above Musigny to one of his favorite spots, a little village vineyard called Clos de Vougeot.
How do you spell the name?
Clos de Vougeot is D-A-N-J-U-E-R-R. INS.
G. No?
This naturally isolated vineyard has a very special and unusual treat waiting for us. A small flock of sheep.
Can you handle it while I open the gate, please? Just close it behind because we have some sheep in the vineyard. After you. So here it's all in peso because it's small vineyard, and we did this architectural thing which has been designed by my brother, who's an architect. So the bottom is the sheep shelter, and the top, the roof, is a terrace. A vineyard which shows the dedicacy of the team, as everything has been replanted by hand. We did put a fence all around, all by hand, so it took weeks. The team came on a weekend to build the stairs by hand. So there are many things about this vineyard which are really important to us. I don't know about the sheep.
Other regions around the world use sheep in their vineyards to naturally manage cover crops while simultaneously fertilizing the soil. But the Côte d'Or poses a pretty unique challenge. When you only own a few rows of various vineyards scattered along the côte, how do you manage a flock of sheep? Especially when your neighbors may or may not share your farming philosophies.
Yeah, we have 7 sheep.
Hi!
But they're quite sauvage. If we walk closer, they will run. So there's one male, Albert, which is in the middle. Is 6 ladies around. So there's Paulette, Hortense, Anémone, Babette, and we got 2 births last spring for Easter, Joséphine and Madeleine. I think if we go on the terrace, they will get closer. They will think we have some food. The one is always coming close. It's Paulette. She's the only one with some small horns, the one on the right. It's the less shy of them. Albert and Babette is the fat one, are the 2 scariest. The guy is the most shy. He's always scared. And it's the adult size. It's Wesson sheep, so they're not too big, so they don't compact much. And the same, we are discovering the élevage work with the team because we have to cut the wool in the summer. We come every week to give them a little bit of water, but it's a very rustic breed. They don't need much care. When they do have lamb, they take care of it themselves.
And so they live here, and you occasionally take them to other...
We take them out when the budding is starting. And as it's large, but not so much, they can easily eat everything because as you see, the vineyard is cool. We are still in the shade, so it's a very cool place. So last spring we've tried to put them to some other vineyards. I have a project that will start maybe this spring. There is a new bergère, a girl taking care of some lambs, who just moved to Burgundy last year. She was doing that in the mountain, she was doing transhumance. So we have the project to do eco-pâturage on 100% of the domain. All the 50 vineyards, the 14 hectares, from harvest to debudding. So I showed her the vineyard, and she will normally get enough sheep, and she will put like 10 year, 20 year, 3 day, depending on the vineyard size, and twice a year.
Juste une clôture électrique, a little...
Ouais, just a little electric fence for the time they are. So they will stay in each vineyard 5-6 days. So they will do a mowing in winter, but they do the fertilizing at the same time, and they reseed what they mow. So as you saw, there are many tall herbs. So at this time, it would be the ideal to have everything mowed nicely. You get the roots, and it's cleaner, so it will be better to regrow in the springtime, and you have all this natural fertilizer. So we'd love to do it twice, one just after harvest, and one before the bedding. We cannot do it ourselves. It's really a job. It's a lifetime job.
Is there anyone else doing that, bringing animals into vineyards?
A few when they have a clos next to the domain, like Clos du Château from Gilbert, or the Trapette have a clos. Some have chicken, or 1 or 2 things.
Yeah, I suppose.
But to develop with so many puzzled vineyards, we would be the first in Burgundy. I think I will start on my own when I'm pretty sure there are some neighbors then that will contact me like, can we join, can we make it bigger? But if you contact them first, everybody will be scared about having the vines and the birds eaten. So if we are able to really start, they will observe, and I think after one vintage I will have some neighbors who will contact me to start to do some, and that will be interesting. Even for the bergère herself, to have larger vineyards like this, it's more easy.
We make our way to a small terrace overlooking the slope below us. Charles pours us a taste of Chambolle-Musigny as we watch the sheep cautiously make their way closer to us.
How have you found the perception with your neighbors of your farming?
Depends. For example, the 2 gates, they've been vandalized 3 times. They got broken at night to have the ships go away and stuff like this. But they love the shelter, and it's, as you see, quite scared. So just one went out once. They didn't left. It's not just with the neighbors, even the wine pros not necessarily understand why you want to change things and do different, because it works so well this way. Why to change and be different and give us more work, more complication?
Why do you want to change things?
Because I think it's more exciting. You drink wine or you want to talk about wine because it brings you something, not because you need to. It needs to give you something special. So if we don't do it with a special intention, how can it develop something special to you? I think there are too many wines nowadays which are well made. They have no defaults, but how long will you remind them? How long they will last? Because the lack of soul, because now it means so much in terms of money. It's more easy to have a secure recipe, try to have a good crop, limit the cost price to maximize the margin. When you try to do opposite, we care about what's in the bowl, in the glass, and not how it's made.
I think it's great because if Burgundy is going to ask for these prices, it has to have that level of concern in it.
Were you all in when you started doing this, or was it like one vineyard at a time?
So I didn't start it this way, with this mind. It's some wines that, and some meetings that really changed my perception. Started with people with whom I was at school at, like Aurélien Gerbech and Nicolas Faure. Meeting those people, they were not growers. Nico was in school, he didn't got his vines already, he didn't know what he was going to do, he was going to work for domains like he did, like the Conti and stuff. And they were more passionate than sons and daughters of growers than us, who were very lucky. So by being close with those people, I realized that we were maybe missing out something, and I developed more patience and more concern about what was happening and what we were doing. So it really started this way. I first learned how we were working. From the first year, we did big change in the winemaking process. So 2012, we started with a whole cluster, and we started to change in the vineyards to work from 14. So one vineyard not trimmed, we moved to Guyot-Poussard, and slowly things
But it
point.
is really, I mean, that's still a really, really fast change.
I'm not very patient. It's not in my character.
Were you supported by your father too, though?
Completely. I wouldn't have been able to do it if my parents didn't have support me, and they did. That's how we were able to change so many things so fast. I'm still an employee of the domain, so my mother and my family still agreed on the decisions, and now we have a team which is very up to it, very implied in the process. So it's very cool because we still have more and more projects coming in our mind, so we'll try to keep it going. They are not as scared as before. Before, when you came and you were more than 2, you couldn't approach them by 20 meters.
Yeah.
Well, now you see they're coming at 4 meters.
Because maybe there's food.
And they get used to see us in the vineyards, the team when they come to work, when we spend the day, when we prune, they are here.
The friendliest is...
Yes,
Paulette.
Paulette.
Hey, Paulette.
We finish our glasses, blow kisses to the sheep, and head back down the hill through the village of Chambolle and into Morey-Saint-Denis. Morey-Saint-Denis is our third and final village of the day. It's similar in size to Chambolle, with only 148 total hectares of vineyards. 64 are village, 44 are Premier Cru, and 40 are Grand Cru. There are 4 Grand Crus: Clos de Lambre, Clos de la Roche, Clos Saint-Denis, and Clos de Tar. Both Clos de Lambre and Clos de Tar are monopoles, owned by dueling French billionaires, according to Paul. This amounts to over 16 hectares of monopole Grand Cru in this little village. Morey is often considered to be a somewhat overlooked appellation in the Côte de Nuits, particularly compared to its shiny, charismatic neighbors, Chambolle-Musigny and Gevrey-Chambertin. But Morey certainly deserves its due respect, not only because of its major Grand Crus, but the quality of the Premier and Village wines too.
All right, welcome to Morey.
Okay, and so we want to do a little walk?
Yeah, I thought we can just walk around. So this is our winery. This, as a result, is nicknamed Le Clos de Vougeot, but it's called Le Village. Not all the vineyards that touch the village, but all the vineyards that are kind of enclosed into the village, are really into the inhabitations and so on, are called Le Village in Morey and a lot of other villages. So there's actually some Premier Cru Le Village, which is confusing.
Our first stop here is with Jeremy Seysses of the beloved Domaine Dujac. Though they need no introduction, Jeremy and his wife Diana are two of the more prominent voices in the wine industry today. Jeremy is half French, half American, and Diana is an American winemaker from Napa Valley. She's the enologist here at Domaine du Jacques, as well as the winemaker at her family's Snowden Vineyards label in Napa. They're an inspiring young family whose values and generosity are as great as the wines they make. They're both passionate about a wide array of important issues affecting the wine world today, including fighting climate change in the vineyards and in the winery, and building diversity throughout the industry. They're also just nice people who happen to be very cool.
I kind of look at Jeremy Seysses as a bit of a druid of Burgundy, in that he has a vision of Burgundy where he can remove himself from the present and see Burgundy as a whole and see it in a very, very healthy way. I almost feel that Jeremy is rising to a position of, he would deny this and wouldn't want this, but in a way he's a spokesperson for Burgundy. In a way where Aubert de Villaine, who's now officially retired, didn't accept or take a role of spokesperson, but he was. He really was. And I could see Jeremy and Diana taking that place.
Jeremy takes us on a walk along the vineyards surrounding the domaine and points out some of the great Morey-Saint-Denis vineyards while describing what he believes are some of the key factors to understanding terroir in Burgundy.
So I feel like there's this hyper-focus on geology right now on the soil, because terroir, people are just, it's the dirt. And then when you go to the New World, they think climate quite a lot. It's just drainage and climate. I feel like it's neither. You've got to be very holistic in the whole thing. So this is Les Pourroux, and this is where we have most of our village. So we have a piece here. We were able to buy this little strip here, which was once a more significant orchard. We're going to replant it and we're going to try to have more of an orchard.
Jeremy points out a narrow line of trees amongst the sea of vines. It's surprising to think of these few trees as an orchard, but it's pretty incredible once you consider the statement they're making. Planting trees in place of very valuable vines in Burgundy is a pretty substantial risk.
The neighbors are pushing for us to put vines because we're getting, there's some shading, there's some competition and things like that. But I think it's very important that it stays at trees. And there was 2 other orchards along this street, which you can see no evidence of unless you do aerial photography in winter or something like that. But I think this was important. There were much more trees across the landscape, and there's the beginning of a conversation of putting more trees. I do think that they provide shading, but they also provide shade for workers during breaks. They provide diversity. They bring something which is otherwise fairly intensive monoculture. And so we do have forest up there. We do have more forest down there. We do have some polyculture and things like that. I think this saves us a little bit. So this is Chambolle, by the way. And so that's the other thing, is a man-made construct. There's a reason why all Chambolle does not taste like Chambolle, because some Chambolle should really be Morey. This definitely did not come out of that comb. And so Chambolle was the big name. And so commercial imperatives of the time said, well, we should make a lot of Chambolle, we could just come here, but we want some Morey, so we'll start Morey at Morey. And Chambolle is almost 200 hectares, and Morey is 60. And the populations are, Chambolle by population, half the size of Morey. But the hillsides were planted much higher up, all the way through phylloxera, and then after phylloxera, those upper parts of the hills disappeared. But when you go up there, frequently you find terraces, you find stone walls and things like that.
Jeremy points to an unplanted section of grass and a few trees at the top of the slope in front of us.
So here it's fairly high, but over above the Musigny, you can see there's just not much. And then a number of producers in the post-World War II, and I don't know exactly when it happened, but I know around that, and certainly on the plateau there, they went and scraped soil to put soil back in the vineyards, because they had erosion, because at the time herbicides and so on. It's like, oh, well, just grab some soil up here and put it down there. And so things were super barren up there. When I was a kid, there was mostly grass you would have seen up there, and with just juniper bushes. So this is Chambolle-les-Sentiers. Then by that white cabin, that there's 2 roads that fork like that, that's Les Baudes. And then above is Bonnemare. Have you walked in Bonnemare yet? Because that's definitely the cool, very visible examples of, so you can see how white the soils are on that path. And then you go through a zone that's browner, and then you go into red soil. I only did them separately in 2005, but I tasted them at Christophe Roumier's a bunch of times. And so I think the Christophe Roumier said I like the blend best, and I thought, if it's good enough for Christophe Roumier, it's good enough for me.
He continues to bring up an important point about the scale of terroir.
So when we're talking about bonne marque, there's frequently this assumption. You hear a lot of vignerons say, oh, les anciens savaient, the old people knew. I think that's discounting human nature a lot of the time. It was like, oh, well, we put roads where we can't plant. The rock is right there, and so this is a good place for a road and not such a good place for planting, so let's do that. Let's quarry here because the rock is apparent so that we can build the houses there. Let's put the village in the combe because there's a bit of shelter, there's water underneath that we don't need to trek 5 miles for a well and so on. And I think that people discount the notion of convenience or practicality in a lot of the way these things were shaped. And I think that the Burgundian way is you take your block, you take bonne marque top to bottom, you put it in one tank and you nail it and you don't blend it. You don't try to say, oh, this brings the power, this brings the finesse. As the Bordelais would very well know and would tell you, it's not as simple as one brings power, one brings finesse, and therefore you have power and finesse. No, the power can cancel the finesse, and you can do 1 + 1 = 0, 1 + 1 = 3. It just, these don't work out.
Heard someone say you can blend the life out of things.
Oh, for sure. I mean, from any vineyard, you could take the bottom, the middle, and the top, or you could break it down to these 4 vines. You can keep microscopizing it if you want. That's a terrible term. But anyway, you could keep making it smaller. And even if you took like this row and this row and this row and you fermented them in their entirety and you fermented them in 3 separate vessels, you would end up with different expressions. So I think it's very important that as a winemaker or as people who love wine, etc., at some point it is arbitrary. There's an intellectual satisfaction to keeping things separate and celebrating their differences, but there's also something important, which is to make good wine. And in the same way, you could separate young vines or you could separate all the place names, but at some point we decide what is the best compromise or the best package. And so, yeah, there are multiple geologies coming together. There are multiple clones, there are multiple vine ages, there's sometimes more than one tank and so multiple ferments. And I think that that's a truth as well. But it's up to individual choice at that stage as you're making it. And I think that there's value in that. I feel like you can get too lost in the micro differences and lose a bit sight of the fact that what you're trying to make is a wine that speaks of place, but is also delicious, and sometimes that one can be at the expense of the other.
The decision of how something is broken up, either deliberately or through the parcelization of a vineyard through time, is itself a stylistic choice. If terroir is the translation of a sense of place, someone must still decide which place.
No, we're tasting through the magic that is fermentation and that is a grape growing in a place, and I think that's a real thing. But anyone who gardens knows that there's, good places to grow tomatoes in your garden or a fig tree, and other places where you grow other things, and it's not that hard. It's just Grand Cru in the Côte de Nuits up till now has been a good place to grow Pinot Noir. It just turns out well more often than not.
Now that we've been properly introduced to Morey-Saint-Denis, we're ready for a deeper dive into the vineyards themselves. To do this, we're meeting with Cyprien Arlaud of Domaine Arlaud. That's Arlaud spelled A-R-L-A-U-D, not to be confused with Domaine Le Arlaud, spelled A-R-L-O-T, based in Nuits-Saint-Georges. This short visit is my first time meeting Cyprien, and I find him instantly likable. He's smart, charming, and clearly in tune with his vines, which are all horse-plowed and fully biodynamic. We hop in the car and set out to explore Morey.
Keep your car clean.
As you know, Morey is one of the tiniest appellations of the Côte de Nuits. Very recently with Françoise, I discovered all the complexity with the geology and the philology. But of course, before that, I had the real feeling by working on the vineyards for more than 20 years. Then Morey, even it's very tiny, have heaps of diversity in the soil, the microclimate, which is shown through the 21 different Premier Cru. And the most of the size of Morey is taken by the Premier Cru and the Grand Cru. But the fact there's 21 different Premier Cru, for me, is the real sign of the diversity of Morey.
We begin on the northern edge of the appellation, near the border with Gevrey-Chambertin.
You see the little gorge? Just make the limit between the Lambray and Clos de Tarsailles and the Clos de la Roche and Clos Saint-Denis side, this gorge.
Cyprien is prepared with the recently completed geologic maps by Françoise, so I know this really will be a deep dive. A large combe separates the village into 3 parts. A generous alluvial fan extends out from the combe, splitting the village into northern, central, and southern sections once again.
Just to show you where are exactly everything. With the small castle there, that's the Mont-Luisan part. And the Mont-Luisan have a very specific kind of soil.
The northern side of Morey, adjacent to Gevrey, is dominated by hard Premo and Comblanchian limestones that weather to produce very thin, clay-rich soils. There are also some big pockets of Grès-Lité, particularly in Mont-Louisant, the center of Clos de la Roche, and just above the Clos Saint-Denis.
Then you have, if you continue the slope, all in front of us, that's the Clos de la Roche, from the castle to the new parcel just up there with the wall. Maybe I'll show you the map, it's easier. Inside the Clos de la Roche area, you have the original climat of Clos de la Roche, and the extension has been done in 1930. So you can see from the castle to this road with the tree, that's the limit of Clos de la Roche. And on the other side of the road, that's the beginning of Clos Saint-Denis. So just to...
It's so much gentler.
Yeah,
It's really impressive.
It's more steepery in the Clos de la Roche. And the Clos Saint-Denis, the slope is closer from the gorge. And is also, I like to say, we go there. The Clos Saint-Denis is the perfect Grand Cru miniaturism. Small slope, everything is small, but that's the perfect exposition, middle of slope. And the Clos de la Roche, you have this more diversity with the because some parts are more steepery, and also diversity of soil.
Okay.
Alors, this road make the limit with Morey and Gevrey.
Oh wow.
Okay.
We stop to take a look at the Premier Cru au Chazot, just along the border of Morey and Gevrey. Though it's low on the slope, the soils here are shallow, only 20 centimeters or so over Comblanchian limestone.
Okay. So, one thing is interesting to understand, of course, with the map, you understand better the different kind of geology we have there and there. It's very, very opposite. But also the concept of microclimate. We get much more cool wind from the north there. It's completely open, and we get this cold wind from the north.
Yeah.
And so we have one block there. Just underneath, it's very full of limestone. It's very some.
Yeah, like
just
20
there.
centimeters.
Yeah. So.
Wow.
That's the maximum.
Good sound.
So this part where we are is probably more similar to across the road with the Mazoyère-Chambertin.
Gevrey, yeah.
It's Gevrey-Mazoyère. So this part of Morey have more, I will almost say, taste and spirit of Gevrey, where we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Even we are in Morey. So the particularity, like for these vineyards will be picked 1 week later, and it makes even for the same Premier Cru in the same village, 2 different worlds. The Premier Cru has plowed by horses. Okay, since 2003.
And
so,
it's your sister?
Yeah, my
right?
sister started, and now she gives hand to 2 other men.
Okay.
2 men to make the job of 1 woman.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
That's the same always. We want during the winter the soil protected with the grass. And just for this one, they've done a small plowing, and it's very nice to see. The texture of the soil is very supple.
Yeah,
soup,
it is.
The texture, and that's one of the key to express in the wine the taste of the place. If it's completely compacted, it doesn't work.
We continue just up the slope and make a quick stop at the Clos Saint-Denis.
Grand Cru,
Nice.
Clos Saint-Denis is one of my favorite.
Okay.
Yeah. Clos de la Roche, 17 hectares. Clos de la Roche, okay. Clos Saint-Denis, 6.5. So the tiniest Grand Cru of Morey. Not the more known, because it's more confidential. We only 13 owner of the Clos Saint-Denis. This plot is in the historic Clos Saint-Denis Clos. Okay, it was initially 3 hectares before to be extended to 6.5 in the 1930s. Voilà. But for me, I was explaining you that the Clos Saint-Denis, that's exactly the Grand Cru, so middle of the slope. Doesn't look very steepery.
Yeah.
but the geology is very different from the bottom to the top, the soil as well, and it's very subtle. It's very subtle, but it makes all the complexity, also the spirit of this wine. For me, it's very close from the spirit of a Musigny.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because Morey-Saint-Denis character, Morey-Saint-Denis wine can be more the feet on the floor.
Yep.
And for me, Clos Saint-Denis have this spirit. We can lift the wine higher with more complexity, more elegance, more finesse.
Back in the car, we drive through the center of the village towards the southern side of the appellation.
So we pass quickly in the center of Morey-Climat. There you have this road make the limit with the Premier Cru and the village part.
Okay.
And this village part is a very nice part of Morey. It's more humid.
In the lower section?
Yeah, it's lower, more clay, it gets more humid also.
Yeah, this is like south facing.
Yeah, south facing, exactly. And it makes wine not great complexity, but very on the seductive fruits character, which is also maybe the main skill of a Morey village. Okay. A Morey village is probably not as complex as Chambolle and Gevrey, but it makes this accessibility for the wine just to please you and to charm you. And on just cross the road, it makes more serious wine.
The southern edge of Morey begins with a little sliver of Bonne-Mare. This is owned by Bruno Claire, who we'll visit with in our next episode. The consistent geologic block of Bonne-Mare continues into Clos de Tar. Above it, one of my favorite vineyards, on La Rue de Vergy, is a folded-up combination of white oolite and Prémaux limestone. The Clos de Lambray combines these two vineyards with Prémaux at the top, Gres Lité sitting over Ostrea acuminata marl, and a couple little slivers of white oolite at the top and crinoidal limestone at the bottom. Our final stop is in the Premier Cru Les Ruchots, just beneath Bonne-Mare and Clos de Tar.
This climat is also one of my favorites. Alors, we see better the
oh, cool.
what we were talking about with also this. All this part, you see the wall just in front of us. This is the limit with the Clos de Tar. Alors, Ruchot is very similar to a Clos, very protected from the cold wind of the north. With this free wall, it's a bit lower. You have a big step between the road and big break with the Clos de Tar and the Ruchot. You find this
only there.
Hololite ferrugineuse. It was very funny because Françoise was reminding 20 years ago when we also did that for the horse ploughing to see the benefit of the horse ploughing. We've seen those small bubbles of iron in the limestone.
Yeah.
It was magic. And she said it's a paradise for vineyards because you have all the 4 kinds of limestone, you've got all those minerals, and there is a kind of energy there. So if we go in the middle, the fact you got those walls, everything get focused.
Yeah, it's like a little nest.
Yeah. For the wine, it really expressed, for me, it's one of the 3 best Premier Cru of Morey. We really express complexity. But for the vine, it's just love to be there.
After spending this time with Cyprien and tasting the wines later, I was surprised that I hadn't heard more about this domain until now. So I asked David Hinkle, the chief French officer at Skurnik Wines, to tell me more about him. David has been working with the domain since 1990, when Cyprien's father was running the show, and has been a big fan since day one. Here's what David had to say about Cyprien. Cyprien Arlaud was not handed a famous property when he took over full-time in 1998, but he's one of the most thoughtful growers that I've worked with over the last 35 plus years, and I don't think there's anybody I've seen that has been closer to his vines. Today, he's at the height of his powers. To end our day, we leave Morey-Saint-Denis and head back into the village of Chambolle-Musigny for a visit I've been looking forward to for years. There's an impressive cluster of talented vignerons in this quaint little village.
Ghislain Barteau, the wines are great. I mean, you can throw a dart in any of the Premier Crus in the Barteau cellar and you're going to get a great wine. I certainly think that Amiel Cervelle is doing a great job. I haven't really tasted Cru de l'Aubaye, but he's being talked about a lot. And the other 2 domains that are being talked about are Sigo and Felatig.
And even amongst such incredible peers, there are two names that always sit at the top. Christophe Roumier of Domaine Georges Roumier and Frédéric Mugnier of Domaine Jacques-Frédéric Mugnier, who happen to live and make their wines right next door to each other. Both make exceptional, expressive examples of Musigny, Bon Mar, and Les Amoureux. Yet, while each producer makes wines that are true to the expression of Chambolle, their styles are distinctly different.
Christophe Roumier is one of the most careful, thoughtful, yet at the same time instinctive winemakers in Chambolle. I find his wines to be among the greatest in all of Burgundy. I also find that they don't give early on, depending on the vintage, some earlier than others. They're wines that require patience. I think they're very expressive of their terroir. When you jump around his vineyards and taste, there's a lot of clarity, a lot of definition. If I were to describe the difference between Fred Mugnier and Christophe Roumier, is I think the wines of Christophe really perform like Muhammad Ali, where they could pack a major, serious punch, but they also dance like a ballet dancer. Absolutely beautiful. And I talk about Muhammad Ali because he was like just a beauty to watch. It was just the most extraordinary thing to somebody like this move. And Christophe Roumier has that weight, that intensity, the energy, the power, the muscle, but without being heavy and without being aggressive. And Fred Mugnier is more of a ballet dancer with a light touch. You know, it's that light touch that makes his wines so extraordinary because they require attention. They have a subtlety to them, but they also have amazing intensity and length on the palate.
We make our way into Chambolle and beyond the metal gates of Domaine Mugnier. I've been eagerly anticipating this visit, and until just a couple of days prior had never met Fred, despite several attempts on my part. As such a meaningful figure in the Wasserman household, I'd been lucky to have some very special bottles of Mugnier over the years, only on the most profound occasions. A couple of nights earlier, I'd been lucky enough to attend a dinner with Fred, hosted by the Wassermans as a part of a week-long Chambolle symposium. When I told him how excited I was to speak with him, he gave me a look of doubt and suggested I might not want to hear what he had to say. "Terroir's bullshit," he said, with a little sparkle in his eye. I assured him I couldn't wait.
Yes, he's a provocateur. Fred is a very unusual person, and I think that's why he got along with Becky so well. Very shy, almost awkward, and that sort of describes Becky too, even though she got over her shyness. And Fred's very profound and very serious and very thoughtful about things. And his engineer background makes him weigh things, much like Pascal Mugneret, very precisely. They like everything to be reasoned as much as possible and scientifically or logically constructed until the point where they can't explain anything and then they set free. Fred was determined to make very graceful, delicate wines. Those were not popular at the time. Fred chose to make wines that were very discreet and elegant and not extracted, not very wooded, and not dense. It took a very long time for the Domaine to garner the fame that it has today, despite the incredible appellations and the incredible quality of the wines. But there's a combination of Chambolle and the lack of artifice. They're breathtaking, 10 years being a minimum, but the early 2000s now from Fred are just ravishing. And there's Chambolle to thank too, but there's this non-egotistical, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Every craftsman or every artist needs an ego to produce beautiful things, and that translates as style. And there's a Fred style in the absence of any noticeable stylistic signature.
Fred is the 5th generation of the Mugnier family, yet the first to be actually involved in running the estate. The family business was an apéritifs, absinthe, cassis, and other spirits. There are some beautiful old advertisements of this decorating the house we're sitting in. Professionally, Fred was an engineer working mostly in offshore oil operations in the Middle East, before his father passed away and he decided to return to this place he knew relatively little about.
So I asked for a leave from my company I settled in this house and I went to school in Beaune to learn the basics of wine and viticulture. And I made it the job of my life. So no, I really didn't know anything about wine or making wine or working a vineyard when I settled here and when I made my first vintage in 1985. There are very few jobs where you have such a full control on the whole process and with a total liberty and responsibility, which goes together. So if the wine is good, I can take some pride from it. If it's not good, I cannot blame anybody else. And that's very exciting and satisfactory. The other thing is working with nature. Working with a vine is a living being, and wine itself is always changing, moving, and it cannot be reduced to laboratory tests and laboratory analysis. So there's a complexity that will always escape understanding. So the mystery I find very, very exciting.
The mystery, for me at least, lies in the terroir. Fred is fascinated by the differences in each of his wines, so I wonder what it is that he struggles to believe in.
Geology is obviously a major factor for terroir. Each piece of land, what we call a climat, will produce different wines with different names. And they really are different. There is a reality there. And we have tried and worked a lot to try to understand the reason for the differences between one vineyard and the neighbor. We have worked mostly on geology, which gives a good part of the explanation. But it's not enough. Geology doesn't explain all the differences. So there must be something in the earth or the underground or elsewhere. So what can it be? My first guess would be a circulation of water, which is very difficult to see and understand. And something else that has been not very much studied, which is the microclimate. And we tend to underestimate the differences of the microclimate of the different spots in the vineyard, even some very close, ones that are very close to each other. I realized that during a night in April 2016, when I was worried about frost. So I spent most of the night walking in the vineyard or driving in the vineyard with a precision thermometer. And I realized there were huge, unexpected differences in the temperature between places very close to each other or very similar to each other. Something like 5 degrees in the middle of the night. Morey-Saint-Denis is warmer than Chambolle-Musigny is colder than Bonne-Mare. And there is a third factor, which is human influence, the history of the parcels. The legend about the climat of Burgundy is that 900 years ago, the monks were walking in the vineyard and looking at the landscape and looking at the soil and tasting the rocks and were able to identify the different climat. Well, I don't. It's a nice legend, but it's only a legend. The limits between the climat were basically limits of properties. Most of them are roads or trails. And sometimes the roads happen to correspond to geological limits, but it's not the rule. So I say the limits of climat is in most cases historical limits of properties. And the question is how these limits may have become limits between wines with different tastes. And my idea about it is that when a vineyard is worked by one man or one family, possibly over several centuries, it is changed. The work that is done on this plot will eventually change the quality of the earth, the quality of the soil. And it's probably most obvious on climat that have been monopolies for a very long time, like Clos de Vougeot in Morey, which has been a monopoly for 1200 years or something like that. And you can imagine that after 1200 years of being worked by the same people who have been moving earth within the vineyard every day by plowing or once a year for bringing the earth from the bottom back to the top. It will create a unity within this vineyard that maybe did not fully exist at the beginning when they built the walls around it.
I mean, if the monks had hundreds and hundreds of years to do this, and yet all of the great vineyards, the soil changes color obviously from the top to the bottom. So if they were trying to designate, they probably would have put a wall in between the top part of Bone Mar and the bottom part of Bone Mar. You know, like they had a long time to figure out white soil versus red soil, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. And also you have to keep in mind there is a history of the place before the monks. And there were people working there, living there, cultivating the soil there since the Neolithic age. The boundaries were not drawn with the purpose of separating different types of wines. In fact, the idea of identifying wines by the name of the land where they come from is relatively recent. It's much more recent than the vineyard. It dates back from the 18th century, maybe the end of the 17th, not earlier than that. Before that, the wines were sold as either vin de Dijon or vin de Beaune, and blended by merchants. So it's a modern idea, the idea that gives to a wine the name of where the grapes were born. And the boundaries of the climat were set much earlier, centuries before that. So it cannot be the taste of the wine who decided on the limits. People sometimes have romantic ideas about the names of the wines. Les Amoureuses, obviously. I would bet Les Amoureuses has nothing to do with love. Doesn't make sense. And the best explanation I heard is the earth is in love when it sticks to the boots. Which makes sense because that's what a farmer would think when working the vineyard. And it is true, there's a lot of clay in the Les Amoureuses and it does stick to the boots.
That sounds dangerously close to terroir.
Well, the other thing they were named for is what grew there before the vines, sometimes. Genévrière. If you look at paths where there are no vineyards, they're first drawn by animals. And that's where people will walk because it's flat, there's no grass. There's a logic that may sometimes follow these faults.
The first trails were set in the Neolithic age by prehistoric men. They were walking, most likely, where it was easiest to walk.
Exactly.
Those trails have become roads, and they may now be the boundaries between two different vineyards, two different climats. And probably if it was easier to walk there must be a geological explanation to it. I'm not sure I should tell you a story.
You definitely should.
But it's, I think, very interesting. So I shouldn't kill the myth about Les Amoureuses because, that's such an extraordinary wine with such very clear identity, very strong identity, which is very unique. You will not find that character anywhere else than in Les Amoureuses. And it's emotional and it's magical. And I have two plots in Les Amoureuses. One of them is in a place called the Quarry. And when you look around, you can see it has been a quarry. And I have to replant that plot. So I pulled up the vines 2 years ago. And that was the opportunity to try and understand what is under the surface. So I found that the bedrock is very close to the surface. It's like 30 centimeters, and then you find almost solid rock table. It's calcaire de Comblanchien, which is very hard and solid. And the topsoil is basically clay, but actually it looks like forest soil. It's dark. It's very obvious it was taken from somewhere and brought there, and it's not organized. It's all mixed up, and you can find pieces of brick, pieces of charcoal, round rocks like you find in rivers. Plenty of things that have nothing to do there, that are not original. And it makes sense, it's obvious, since it was a quarry, and they had to bring some earth from somewhere else to fill the quarry and plant the vines. And now my question is how this completely artificial soil, terroir, can produce such magical wines that cannot be found anywhere else.
I think that is kind of like part of the magic of it, right? Because it's not like it came from the soil factory. We don't know where it came from, and it's almost even just as miraculous and coincidental or serendipitous that like wherever they got the clay from was such a good fit for the place that they put it.
I'm happy with the idea that man can contribute to shape the terroir. Yeah. And provided that it does the work slowly over centuries with care. But I wouldn't like to discover that you can make les amoureuses from anywhere. If you find a table of Comblanchien and you bring some forest earth on it, on the top of it, I would hate this idea. Would you like to see the cellar?
Yes. We walk down to the cellar where we begin tasting the 2020 vintage from barrel, starting with Chambolle-Village and Premier Cru Le Fouet.
So I make all my wines exactly the same way. There is absolutely no difference in the process whatsoever between Village and Grand Cru, or Chambolle or Nuit Saint-Georges. They are all made exactly the same way, with the idea that I don't want to interfere with the expression of the terroir. The wine should have the taste of the place where it comes from, and not my idea of what it should be. I try to be as invisible as I can in my wines. So the expression of the wines must be an expression of nature. The expression of nature is richer, more complex, more exciting, more fascinating than anything I could do.
After the dramatic heat of the 2003 vintage, Fred took this philosophy one step further and began making his wines the same exact way every year, instead of fighting the vintage in the cellar.
There's no point in trying to compensate for the extremes of the weather by doing a different winemaking. And if I let it go, the wines will be harmonious in one way or another. But the risk is I try to interfere, most likely I will ruin that harmony. This is now Bonne-Mare.
Seems to me more powerful than the Fouet, more
It is.
regal. It's like confidence.
Just a person.
Yeah, just like they're standing up very straight. You know, they're very.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I agree. There's something more rigid in this side of Chambolle.
After Bonne-Mare, we taste Les Amoureuses. There was a word you used to describe Les Amoureuses the other night that I thought was really beautiful. You said that some of the beauty within Les Amoureuses is in its fragility.
Yeah, fragility, yeah. Yes, what is very special, what is unique in Les Amoureuses, it's a wine that's very delicate. You could say thin, but it's also very intense and long, very long aftertaste. It's very intense. So it's, you could say it's rich and weightless at the same time. So that's unique. Well, it's rare, but if you like it, you may be touched by the feeling of fragility there, and it's true, it relies on a very precarious balance. It can fall either way, either on the side of the weakness, leanness, and emptiness, or if a winemaker tries to make it bigger than it really is, it will break into pieces, in fact. The tannins will be rough, sharp, coarse, and you will ruin the harmony of the wine. And, okay. Where is the terroir for Les Amoureuses?
It's absolutely beautiful.
It's a very beautiful terroir.
And finally, Musigny.
Less is more. I have an interest for classic Chinese painting, and there's an emptiness takes a great place in the painting. Emptiness is unacceptable in classic European painting. In fact, it's the center of any Chinese painting. And the emptiness is animated by what is drawn on the sides. I find it fascinating. In Europe, emptiness is death. It's nothing. In Asian philosophy, it's just the opposite. It's where everything can happen. Because if it's full, nothing can move, and there's no life, and nothing can happen. For something to happen, to people to meet other people, you need an empty space where they can move into. There must be some emptiness. And if the wine is so dense that there is no space inside it, it's dead. There must be enough open space inside the wine. There was an English wine writer who expressed that very nicely by comparing a musical reference. Now, the famous Canadian pianist Glenn Gould, who recorded the Bach Goldberg variations twice. First time when he was maybe 22, 20, he was a very young pianist, and another time 30, 40 years later. And the first recording is 35 minutes long. The second one is 53 minutes long. And okay, it's the same notes, but there's more life, there's a soul in the second recording, which you cannot find in the first one. He said about this experience, too much piano playing in his first recording. Yeah, he was very skillful and he could play very fast, and it was very impressive. So the difference is 15 minutes of silence inserted, woven into the music. And that's what gives the spirit, the soul in the second recording. But I find there is not enough space in this one at the moment. It's tight, it's very dense. It has to age, to expand, and include a bit more emptiness. This is just to say I have more and more serenity with age, but I have this, je m'émerveille, I wonder as much, as ever, with the miracle of some wines, not each of them. A life of wonder and serenity.
Thank you to our guests, Marie-Andrée and Marie-Christine Mugneret, Jean-Nicolas Mayo, Charles Lachaux, Jeremy Seysses, Cyprien Arlaud, and Fred Mugnier. Thank you to Paul Wasserman and Daniel Jonas for your commentary, guidance, and expertise. Our main source for historical and technical information is Inside Burgundy by Jasper Morris, and our geological information comes from the local geologic expert Françoise Vanier. This episode is made possible by our Season 2 partners, Becky Wasserman & Co., La Palais, and Acker Wines. Roadside Terroir is hosted and produced by me, Brenna Quigley, recording and sound engineering by Nick Canepa, and original music and sound design by Jeff Alvarez. This season wouldn't be possible without the support from all of you. Check out our website, roadsideterroir.com, to learn how you can stay in touch and how to help support this season by donating, sponsoring, or becoming a Roadside Insider. We would like to extend a special thank you to our Grand Cru patron, Stephen Lippin. Thank you for making this episode possible. Thank you to Isa Islami, Jerusha Frost, Ali Massey, Summer Stabe, Michael Sager, and everyone else who helped make this episode a reality.
And we came last week, he was taking care of the 6 of them, so maybe we'll have 6 new lambs that spring. So after I think we'll stop, because 13 to manage is...
taking care of them. How generous of them.
It was weird. We arrived with the team, they were along the rocks, and we thought they were stuck with some herbs, but no, they were just queuing. It was really weird. They were in line, and it was going from one to the other.
What a lover. Yeah. Lots of love to go around.
Maybe he thinks it's a grind.
T'as dit quoi?
C'est un jeu de mots.
A grind, c'est un boulot qui te fait chier, mais c'est aussi a grind